sanctuary church, and they felt they had a common bond with us. And a few days later, we had a Syrian, missionaries, and they came for the exact same reason. Two totally different topics, but they saw a common thread in what they were doing and what we're doing. And that sparked an interest in me that we do have a common thread. And I wanted to really explore that, and Jim Rigby helped me. And it became the common thread was that we're searching for humanity. And that became the title of our series. And that's how it came to be. Because in this very day, in this month, in this year, that's what we need to do. We are searching for humanity, and that is our common thread. With that, I'm going to let Jim Rigby come up and do an introduction for us. Thank you very much.
Put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen, for the fabulous. Well, first of all, thank you. Anybody from St. Andrews that was at the session retreat, or those of you who weren't, who've rotated off and who haven't floated off into the other atmosphere. And the people that were at the Women's March, we had a number that did that, came to church Sunday. So thank you all for getting back up again. The search for humanity, probably 10 years ago, we wouldn't realize how important that is. The basic tenets of humankind, things like the Geneva Conventions, things like the Nuremberg Principles, the Magna Carta, some of the just basic definitional works of what it means to be a human being and what it means to be a democracy have been overturned. And every day that you read the newspaper, there's something caustic coming from our president or our governor. I mean, the idea that a governor would shut down refugees in Texas and that'd be okay with people. I think people are just stunned by it all. So a lot of people are just checking out. That's not what you do when your nation is falling into fascism. Spoiler alert. This is when we need to find our courage, our strength, and our truth to speak our truth. Because basically what we're doing is calling people back to humanity, to the planet, having a livable planet, and this kind of thing. And there are people in the Texas legislature who are there in the belly of the beast, who, I believe in protesting and doing all that kind of thing, but the people who take in those toxic fumes every day to make it a little bit better for the people of Texas and to not leave anybody behind should really be seen as heroes. They don't get to choose between good and evil. Everything's bundled, everything's mixed together, so they're choosing between the least objectionable legislation sometimes. And so I think it's popular to make fun of lawyers and politicians, but you don't have a democracy without those things. Right, so to get back, and as I was saying in church today, the highest office in a democracy is citizen. If there aren't good citizens, you can't have powerful leaders. They're good leaders. So this is a very important conversation to have, and Representative Israel is one of the great champions. We knew that even before she took office, that she was going to stand up for people, and she'd done that before. These are people who really deserve more than just showing up for the elections. To follow them, to support them, to help them, to advocate for them. So I think that's what you're doing today. Thank you so much. Welcome.
I wore my kind of high priestess outfit today. This is the best I could do. Thank you, Reverend Rigby. And it doesn't seem like that long ago that I was elected in a special election, and you were on the House floor saying a small prayer for all of us as I took the oath of office. But St. Andrews has always been kind and welcoming. The concept of this lecture series is very interesting to me, searching for humanity, our common thread. I really admire how this church and congregation has always been inclusive and always been open-minded. You pride yourself on keeping an open heart and an open hand for others, and thank you for that. Thank you for pursuing your community here in St. Andrews. Our Lord knows our state, our country, and our planet need it now more than ever. So, in a time when we build up walls between one another, figuratively and literally, we must challenge ourselves to look to the principles that I remember learning when I was growing up in the Catholic faith. To love thy neighbor, to give generously, to be of service to those in need. With this speaker series revolving around the themes of humanity and our commonality, I really started to think about the word legacy. So you're indulging me by allowing me to kind of talk more about it. I was elected to public office in January of 2014. My journey over the last few years has also coincided with the acknowledgement that I am also a middle-aged woman, an acknowledgement that does not come easily. Some of you may recognize that reluctance. So perhaps I have been thinking so much about legacy, and the reason is maybe it can be explained by my own life's journey. I recognize not everyone has the opportunity to serve in the way that I do. It truly is an honor. And my legislative journey comes at a unique time in Texas politics. We have lived through and are living through an unusually divisive time in politics. The result has been nasty battles on the House floor over social issues that should really already have been reserved by legislation and the courts. The result has been division and far too many emotional battles. If you track our progress, we literally have shed tears on the House floor. We get so emotional about these issues, and this is not normal, what's been happening. In essence, what I'm trying to say is that service in the Texas legislature has been more difficult than it should be. Division is not fun, especially when you are on the losing side. So it is in that political backdrop that I ask the question of myself, why am I doing this, and to what end? At points along the way in life, I suppose each of us has to ask ourselves those questions. I also find that in moments of frustration and moments of hardship, taking a step back to reflect on life's challenges can give us each clarity and even a bit of affirmation that we are where we are for a reason, and reassurance that we can turn those negatives into very beautiful positives. So we'll share some thoughts around the idea of legacy today so we can each think about what it means for one another. If you will allow me to elaborate, I can explain what this means to me, and I hope this will trigger the same questions for you, and you can check yourselves and those around you to assure you are moving forward with positive purpose and good intentions. Serving as a member of the House of Representatives has been the honor of my lifetime. As each of us look back on our lives, whether we are 25 years old or 55 years old, I suspect we do check in with our life status and want to know, am I making an impact? And perhaps more importantly, am I having fun doing it? As a young woman from El Paso, Texas, I never imagined I would attend and graduate from the University of Texas. I struggled with the big bad university in what should have been a 4-year journey, turned into a 6-year learning opportunity. Let's just say I took a little forced time off from the university because they care about the individual at UT and want to make sure each of us succeeds on the 40 acres. So I made it through without having the answers or a career path. But in 1988, which was my final senior year at UT, an answer did present itself to me. I saw and was moved by the speech given by then Texas Treasurer Ann Richards to the Democratic National Convention in 1988. Let's just say I was hooked from that point on. I managed to get a job in the Richards campaign for governor shortly after I graduated from UT, and it turned out to be the smartest thing I had ever done for myself. Working for the candidate and then for the governor was a game changer for a young woman from El Paso, Texas, who by all odds was not supposed to make it out of El Paso, much less out of college and working in the Texas State Capitol. This was my first real job in the political world, and it was this job in my early 20s that really forged my thoughts around elective office. Ann was a popular governor in the 1990s. She was my boss, and she showed me by example what it can mean to be a public servant. You got to dress nicely. Don't be fake. Know your stuff. Hold yourself and those around you to high standards. And for God's sake, crack a joke and never take yourself too seriously. Those of you who remember Ann Richards, I think you could say that was Ann. Since she was my boss, I can say you didn't look into those blue eyes and not know you had a deeper purpose in life. Were it not for the experience of working for the governor, I would not have been able to put myself mentally into the role of elected official, candidate, leader. She opened my brain to the possibility of public service for myself. There are dozens of others like me who worked for this dynamic woman, who were impacted by her example and the work that we did for the people of Texas at that time. The Ann Richards legacy is broad, but it most certainly includes people like me who were young at the time and went on to do good things in many varied ways. So the point here is that Governor Richards has a legacy that was people like me who worked for her and learned from her in the process. It gave me the interest in getting involved in my community on various boards and commissions and in local politics and in helping others get elected. That in turn showed me the potential that I had to run my own race. You see, the journey isn't always straightforward. I didn't dive into local issues with the hope of running for office. It just came together in my head and in my heart. In my case as a state representative, I only get so many swings at the bat. We live in 2-year cycles at the Capitol, which means that every 2 years we muster up all of our courage and charm and make a case for policy that is important to each of our districts. And when I look back on my time in the legislature, after all of this is said and done, I want to be able to say that I did my part to help others. I want to ensure that by my being in the legislature, there is a brighter future ahead for future generations of Texans. I'm always looking back and behind me and making sure there are younger people in my orbit who are also learning and growing. I'm proud to say that I played a small part in making that difference this past legislative session when we passed transformative public education reform. I'll take that applause line for sure. We put more than $6 billion new dollars towards our schools. That was a big deal. That was transformative. That's a legacy. And that's what I kept thinking about as we were doing the legislation. I was praying that my Republican friends, who we don't always see eye to eye, would recognize the need to not sell ourselves short and accept less than. Let's go big. Of course, if I was Queen of Texas, we would have gone a little bigger, but that's okay. We fully funded a full-day, high-quality pre-K for eligible 4-year-olds, fully funded. So those school districts no longer had to do Band-Aid approaches financially to make that work for their children. We gave much-deserved pay raises to teachers and many other staff members who played a role in taking care of our kids throughout the day. There is so much left to do. And as I was talking to my friend Janie here in the audience today, it's that early childhood that is critically important to how well somebody is going to do as they advance in those grades. So that in and of itself is a legacy. But there's so much left to do. The state is severely behind in many other areas, and I know that doesn't surprise this crowd. Particularly with how the state treats my fellow LGBTQ Texans. We lack discrimination protections for housing and employment. Conversion therapy is still very much a lawful practice. For anyone unfamiliar, conversion therapy is the practice aimed at eliminating or suppressing the sexual orientation of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered individuals. I think it's a sin to tell a kid that you're not normal, to tell a kid that you need to be fixed. Unequivocally, studies show that conversion therapy poses serious risks down the road. It dramatically increases risk of suicide in an already vulnerable population. And the American Psychiatric Association has long denounced this practice among those in the field. Since I got to the Capitol in 2014, I have pushed legislation to end this practice in Texas. My bill would ban licensed medical professionals in Texas from practicing conversion therapy on minors, and it allows state regulators to take disciplinary action against those who ignore the ban. I encourage you to take a look at the recording from that hearing last year. This was the Public Health Committee. We finally had a hearing on this bill. I've introduced it 3 times. This last session, we finally had the political equilibrium to get a hearing on it in the Public Health Committee. I encourage you to go to the Texas Legislature website, House of Representatives, and look up Public Health Committee. And it was quite emotional for me as the author of the bill and for those testifying. There are times when I call upon the 10-year-old version of myself in order to channel what is the right way to move forward, and this was certainly one of those times. At the end of the day, I just want kids to be kids. Just let kids be kids. I mention this because it was just a hearing, but it was an emotional evening, afternoon at the Texas State Capitol. It resonated. It's one of the beautiful things about social media. These things can go viral. I got a personal card after the fact from a mom whose gay kid had been having troubles, nightmares. Monsters were coming after this child in her dreams. And mom and the kid had struggled with it. And mom sent me a card to say thank you because she and her kid talked about this hearing, talked about Celia, and that there's people that are there to fight for you. And she said the monsters have gone away. The nightmares are no longer happening. So, as I think about my own personal legacy, that's a good one. That's one. And it was a reminder that what we do at the Capitol matters, even when it's a real, raw moment of truth in the form of a hearing. For too long, Texas leadership has chosen to turn LGBTQ individuals, and particularly children, into political football. But Catholic school taught me that God loves us all, and God doesn't make junk. And when my colleagues decide to push these fringe issues, this sends a message to the next generation of kids that already feel different. My colleagues haven't understood that quite yet. The ball moves further on the bill each session, and we have a long road ahead, but we will continue to move this issue forward. Of course, there are other legislative goals that I have, which could be transformative, and I hope that they will be part of my legislative legacy, and that is that support for laws to help Texans vote rather than restrict their right to vote. Policies like online voter registration are good government and too often seen through a partisan lens. I also hope to ensure that the state of Texas is helping local communities with transportation solutions. For the sake of our environment and our sanity, we must include efficient mass transit systems into our planning efforts. And the state of Texas should be a partner in these initiatives, not an afterthought. So we shall see what the future holds for me as a state official. But let me be clear, I don't believe you need to be an elected member of the House to impart a legacy. And the legacy of someone who happens to hold elective office is not limited to the work that I did in office. It's about how we treat each other every day. It's about finding the little moments in every day and knowing that we did the best within the years that we have. We have visitors come to the Capitol all the time, and I always try to say yes to the invitation to speak to kids, especially. I know kids are paying attention. I've had several children come up to me and say, thank you for talking about my life story because it meant something to them. Perhaps there are some of you in the audience today who are, in fact, role models and have an opportunity to work with kids as well. I encourage you to tell your own story because those children are listening. You never know when telling your own life's journey can have a positive impact on a young person. So, I brought my mom with me today, Maria Elena. We had a recent crossing the bridge moment. She's now living with me in Austin, Texas. She's from El Paso, of course. As a World War II era veteran, as a World War II era young woman, my mother is most proud of her public service at White Sands Missile Range and also helping to process men who were coming into the country in the 40s and the 50s to work on the guest worker program known as the Bracero program. She is proud of that service, but now at the age of 94, with limited mobility and strength, I know my mom looks at me and thinks, I'm her legacy. She made me. You're mine, my mother often says. She's very proud of me, as you can imagine. And I mentioned my mom because I think it's important that, I've never had children of my own, but I know that I should acknowledge those of you who did the best you could, and you didn't have a glamorous job, but you saw to it that your children were safe, were educated, clothed, and fed, and taught to be good people. That's a big challenge in any age, especially today. So regardless of who we are or what we do for a living, someone out there is counting on us, and our legacy is on the line. This cold is getting the best of me, too. Thank you again for the invitation, and thank you for indulging a politician who is perhaps a little too eager to talk about herself. And I hope I've given us all something to ponder for ourselves and what we mean in relation to this vast history of the blue and green marble we call the planet Earth and the vast and diverse landscape that we love called planet Texas. That's the end of my talk. I hope it gave you something to think about and maybe gave you a little bit better sense of who one of your state representatives is and what's going around in her brain. Thank you all very much.
So now it's time for Q&A. Celia, you're in charge of a few different committees. What committees are you working on currently?
In terms of topics at the legislature, of course, everything breaks down by committee. I'm on the elections committee, and I have, up until last session, was on the transportation committee, but I love that topic. But I was serving on the public safety committee, and that's the committee where a lot of gun safety legislation came through that committee, for good or bad, mostly for bad. And I'm not on the redistricting committee, but the redistricting issue is a big issue that we're going to be tackling in 2021 for those who get elected in 2020.
So open it up.
So 2021 is a big year.
Actually, just to elaborate, if you could elaborate on that a bit, the redistricting, and what folks can do to kind of help make it.
Well, some of the mechanics around redistricting are, of course, the census is now. So it's imperative that every community angle that we have, that we're talking to people about the importance of participating in the census. The expectation is that we could get 2, maybe 3 new members of Congress. Of course, you won't get more members of the legislature, which I think is a good thing. But we will be drawing the lines for Congress in Texas. Your state elected officials are, and we redraw the lines for House and Senate. And the reason why it's important for me is that it always hurts my heart when people say, I'm not going to vote, my vote doesn't matter. My rep is a Democrat. and I'm a Republican, and she's not going to pay attention to me. Well, when the partisan lines are so steeply Republican or so steeply Democrat, it encourages a disinterest in voting. And those lines should be more fair and more equally distributed. So this is the year for us to participate in the census. And then in 2021, we gavel in January of 2021, and on or about March of 2021, the federal government will deliver us the numbers, and the Census Bureau will say, here's the numbers. And that's the time when we will then go to our software programs and create districts. It's messy. It's stupid sometimes, because we rely on elected officials to draw these boundaries. This is not a nonpartisan, unengaged process. People will be like, well, that's my mom's house, and I really want my mom to be in my district. So, I mean, it gets really wacky. So, and so in other words, we get it in March, and we're only there for 140 days. So we're going to squeeze an awful lot of significant line and map drawing into a few days in 2021. So it's important to, number one, elect good people to the legislature, of course, and have as many people as you know participate in the census, because of the impact to our social services and our members of Congress.
To work, I had one or two things to worry about each day. I do not envy you going to work and all of the problems we have in this state. One of those problems is near and dear to me, and that's prison reform. The issue of mass incarcerations and all those. I know we're way behind that in this state as well. But what do you feel is the temperature for making some change in our prison and criminal injustice system?
I think it's a really good opportunity for us, and I'll speak for my Republican friends who I think are kind of tired of fighting on these social issues too, and they recognize that criminal justice reform is a good bipartisan issue that we can work on. I think there's a lot more that we could work on, but there is a lot of inertia around this topic, and we saw some last session. And there was a number of progressive bills that had both Republican and Democratic sponsorship, and it is a challenge when I don't want to get too political, but you have a Republican House and a Republican Senate and a Republican governor. We need more balance to really have an impact. But in terms of what my Republican friends are saying, they're saying the right things. I think they need a little more balance and inertia to help some of these bills not only get out of the House, but get some movement in the Senate. The challenge, honestly, is redistricting. It kind of sucks up all the air. And, there's always an opportunity. I mean, we are going to get some other things done besides redistricting and the budget. I'm just saying some of these things kind of squeeze other things, and then you have unintended victims. Really good criminal justice bill that is running out of time. It's a crazy system that we have. But thanks for the question.
Well, back to redistricting, and I know every 10 years we have the census and we have the redistricting, and I know we've been red for a long time, and that's my aim and my plea to get more Democrats, because we need a chance that Texas can have some blue in our government. We've been red for so long, but I guess my query and my wonder is, I remember back in 2000, was it 2000 when the Democrats went to New Mexico and held up the whole redistricting? And am I remembering that correct?
It was in 04.
Oklahoma?
Yeah, and it was in 04 because I think there was a challenge, and then Congressman DeLay came back and said you have to redraw the congressional lines too, all hell broke loose. So it wasn't in 2000, I believe it was 04 or 05.
It kind of took. Yeah, I remember it was there were several.
Yeah, it got drawn out in the court system, and that's invariably what will happen with us is if everything was hunky-dory and we could actually force ourselves to agree on maps, no one would go to the court system and say that's not constitutional. but it's going to happen.
That wouldn't happen again. I guess that's the question is I know that didn't happen in 2010
Right.
because we had to we must have we must have drew the lines again, and then we're going to draw them again. So would
Yeah.
that happen again? Could we go see?
Yeah, anything's possible. We can get really crazy really quick. It's kind of fun. Other thoughts, questions?
I have a
Omar,
question.
Mr. Peña behind you has a question.
You're next.
The Honorable Omar Peña. Pflugerville's in the house. You crossed the freeway.
Thank you. Hello.
Oh my God.
It's big. It's a lot of
Híjole.
concrete. There's a lot of
Oh,
traffic.
I hope you're feeling okay. Is your head a little light?
I'm getting a rash. But Representative Israel, if you could tell yourself now, knowing what you've gone through in the legislative process, and you're about to go into, I believe it's your fourth session.
Fourth session.
What would you tell your first time walking in the Pink Dome in a legislative capacity, knowing what you know now?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I would say don't be scared. Own it. Be it. And some people would say I did, but because I'm not a wallflower kind of gal anyway. But I would say you belong here. You're a member of the House of Representatives, so own it. Maybe it's a chick thing. We always kind of wonder, like, am I worthy? Should I be here? And it happens to us too. So I would say be proud. Be the daughter of Maria Elena and Hugh, and go in there and say I deserve to be here, and I'm here to speak up for the people who elected me. So I would say kind of hit it with a little more passion, but it has worked out. I mean, I find I'm well suited for the legislature because if you followed us, you really do have to have a sense of humor to do what I do, because it's stupid sometimes. So you got to have a sense of humor, and you've got to be able to not hold onto your stuff. You got to know when to lob your bombs and when to say this is the best we're going to get and we got to go. So it's been a wonderful experience. But I also say I mentioned my Ann Richards years because I'm also, people were asking me when I was running, like, why are you running? It's so toxic, and it was at the time that I ran. And I said, because I remember what it used to be like. And that's why I'm running. And again, because I know that we're getting there with every 2-year cycle. And I can feel it. And it makes me feel good that we will eventually get back to that political equilibrium that's going to help everybody in this room, regardless of party affiliation. Thank you, Omar. Yes.
Celia, okay. I'm a VDR, and we work here a little bit to register people in the community. But why is it that we're not on electronic registration, and what's the holdup for that? It seems everybody else has it.
Well, there's over 30 states in the union that have online voter registration. One of the things I've come to appreciate in my time in the legislature is my county officials, because county officials are really not hyper-partisan. They like processes and procedures. They like efficiency. And when you go to vote and your last name is Gonzalez with a Z, and somebody misread your voter registration card and said it was Gonzalez with an S, and then you have to vote provisionally, that's wrong. But if Gonzalez with a Z, it's 10 o'clock at night, and she's renewing her driver's license, she can't go online and fill out a form electronically that says Gonzalez with a Z, with the right address, with the right apartment number. In this day and age where you can go to texas.gov and do thousands of things and millions of transactions, millions of dollars in transactions, it's unfortunate. So I guess you're getting to the reason why, and the reason why is that it's perceived as a partisan advantage to make these systems better and smarter and more efficient. And I don't think we should be driven by that. We should be driven by what's the best system. And the Brennan Center has testified. I had a hearing in my first session about this, and counties could save a lot of money. Travis County spends a couple $100,000 every presidential year hiring temps to read cards and then transcribe them. I mean, it's the 21st century, and we're doing that. And so it wouldn't preclude somebody if we passed this law from doing hand entries. But I guess I'll relate to you a story from the House floor. When I was first pushing this bill, I went up to my Republican colleague and said, hey, I got this bill. And I had a number of Republicans who said, let me sign it, I'm all for it. There was a ton of Republicans on it because their county clerks had said, you damn well better sign this bill because we need some help. But I remember one of my Republican colleagues saying, well, Celia, if we pass this bill, what's to stop you from going to these fancy music festivals that y'all have here in Austin and just going up and down the line with an iPad and getting everybody registered to vote? And I said, nothing. That's the point. They should be registered to vote. It's nothing nefarious. It's not illegal. They are real people. They're entering in more data online to validate they are who they say they are than they would if you were just catching them in front of the Walmart. So there's an unfortunate partisan cloud around it, and we've never had the makeup in the elections committee to allow me to have an early hearing. I've never been the chair of the committee. Everything revolves around the speaker and the chair in the House. And if you're not the speaker and you're not the chair, then you better have an awful lot of charm and a sense of humor, because you're not running the show.
I don't want this to sound as negative as it's probably going to come out, but I go down to the Capitol during the session and I see these busloads of the future farmers and, you know, the mechanical group from East Texas and all these people parading through the legislature. And I have a feeling that they're totally wasting their time, other than they're getting to come to the capital of Texas and see how it really operates. But what is effective as a citizen during the session?
Well, it helps me, especially when I'm meeting people that live in the district. I met some of our, Pflugerville educators and Austin educators, and they said, we've got teachers who are having to get an extra job because the salary that exists right now isn't enough for them. Teachers do something that I could never do, and that is, corral a bunch of kids and get them in order. I could never do that. I appreciate teachers so much. So when, but that, that's me. I try to meet with as many people as possible. So it does resonate with me, especially when they live in the district. So there's something to be said, though, for catching people now during what's called the interim, the in-between time, is visiting with staff. We've got these ideas, or we want to pass this bill, and being smart about your vote. And then people like me that have now been there a few sessions, we dust off those really good-looking bills, and we're going to present them again. And so I never want to discourage people from coming to the Capitol. I think it's all valuable, but I think it's telling that personal story is something I really appreciate. And if you saw some of my social media, like I spent some time, very little time. I've been to a few of the schools in the district. I bought them some donuts or pan dulce, and I'll go to their work session and I'll say thank you. And they say thank you because they got a pay raise, but I want them to know who I am, but I also wanted to see it for real. Like this is something that I did. I helped them be a little bit better, a little bit stronger for their family, so they can be a little bit stronger for that kid that's got challenges. So I like to keep it real, and my colleagues do too.
There's a representative in Houston, I can't remember his name, but for years he's been working to try to get a bill to abolish the death penalty in the Texas legislature, and I understand it has actually been mentioned. Is there any chance that in the near future that they will actually consider that with,
No. I mean, I would
I
love
mean,
to
with
have.
all the proof that people have been exonerated after they've been executed.
Yeah. I think the gentleman you're talking about is Chairman Garnet Coleman, who's super senior member. And that's his bill. And I don't know that he's ever had a hearing on the bill. Perhaps he has back in the old days. But there's value in having a hearing. As I mentioned, from my story on reparative therapy, when you get real and you can tell a story in a public forum, and you can air out the reasons for and against, obviously there's a ton of reasons for abolishing. There's real human stories there that could be told in a public format. So we need to, at the very least, change the composition of the House so that the Speaker will allow something like that to have the hearing that topic deserves. It's more of a challenge in the Senate, and obviously we'd need the governor's office back in order to affect real change at every level, like Board of Pardons and Paroles and all those other criminal justice things that we want to have change. So we do need wholesale systemic change, but it is around the corner. 2020 is going to be a really good year for Texans to vote. We need to take advantage of the fact that it's a presidential year. Unfortunately, people vote in bigger numbers in a presidential year. But there's a lot of good people running this year that I hope you guys will consider, and then just encourage your friends to go vote. Because if you're my constituent, you got a good one. We're good. But your cousin out in Odessa may not have a good one, or maybe ought to take another look at the one they have. So this is a time for us all to say, this is my Texas, and I want you to be more careful with how you're voting.
Buenas tardes, Ceci.
Hola.
Thank you for coming to St. Andrews. Immigration reform is very important to this community. I thought you were in the Homeland Security.
Yeah, it's Homeland Security and Public Safety.
So it's just the safety portion, huh?
Yeah.
You got to protect us from those dang refugees. Híjole.
I know. Yeah, it's a weird conglomeration of things, that committee.
Yeah. Well, as you know, we have a Guatemalan refugee in sanctuary here at the church. So
Yeah.
immigration reform is extremely important to us.
Yeah.
I'm very concerned, angry, and et cetera, about Governor Abbott's decision about refugees and then the current federal decision. And I'm really confused as to whether that's going to have an impact at all. So my question is, do you have any insight, any guesses, an 8-ball that tells you what we might expect in the future in regards to this immigration reform and the conflict between Abbott and federal law, and then some guidance for us, por favor?
Well, it is frustrating, and I'm being a product of the border myself. I know that for me, El Paso was it was pretty cool that I like that I'm from El Paso. El Pasoans are very nice and charming, and it forged me as a woman who represents a high growth area with a lot of new immigrants in it, to know that that the border in my memory was a place for cousins and commerce. It was not a place for terrorism and fear. The problem, though, is that we live in a politically toxic time right now. We've got to get through this time. And again, this time is not normal. What's happening right now is a bubble, and we're going to get through it with every election. But I do not understand a Catholic governor demonizing or using this federal regulation as an opportunity to score political points with 3% of the electorate. And that's essentially what's happening. But the state of Texas does not regulate immigration. But we sure do find an opportunity to to play games with the topic from time to time. For example, our budget has $800 million in it every 2 years for a DPS border force. And it's so they can hire more DPS troopers and a helicopter here, a swift boat there. So it was a political response to say, well, if the federal government isn't going to stop illegal immigration, by God, those Texans are. So it was just more make-believe, take the cap, flip it back, get on a boat and act like you're tough. And, are bad things happening at the border? Absolutely. The level of posturing, I guess, is what I'm saying that we've been doing is not helpful. And we are feeding into that frenzy of demonizing immigrants and demonizing those who are just here to work. I never thought I would yearn for the day when I would have a president like George W. Bush who would call out the fact and say, these people are doing jobs that nobody else wants to do. So let's find a way. My mom mentions all the time the Bracero program, where we had a thoughtful policy by which we allowed people to come in, contribute to our economy, and apply for citizenship. The fact that it takes people over 10 years to become a citizen that's the problem. It's the bureaucracy that needs to be blown apart. So your state government, unfortunately, finds opportunities to do that, but we do not participate in that, and we speak against that pocket of money that we set aside for DPS, and we certainly speak against, if you watch our social media, the governor who seems to want to placate those people who demonize immigrants rather than say, we need them, our economy needs them. So I'm sorry I don't have anything more for you, but the longer view, of course, is we are doing the congressional lines. And our members of Congress in Texas should be more empathetic and supportive to immigration reform. And they're not. It's too easy to placate to the fear rather than take the bureaucratic system and fix it. That's hard work that needs to be done at the federal level. So we will be redrawing maps in 2021 that will be not as partisan. I mean, with the growth that we've been experiencing, even the courts will not be able to say that we need more fair maps. So I'm hopeful that our members of Congress will not be in districts that look like a crab claw, or that are 70% Republican or 70% Democratic. That's not helpful to our democracy. So look for redistricting to at least begin to change that topic.
Speaking of the elections in 2020, who is your opposition?
I don't remember his name. Sorry. I'm sure he's very nice.
So speaking of the crab claws, we have a representative who's running in one of those crab claws. I'd like to recognize Rick Kennedy. Rick, say hello. But you soon will be. Yep. How you holding up?
I'm good. Just
More questions?
hydrating.
Any more? Way in the back.
I guess I'm asking mostly as a citizen of Austin, towards you as a citizen, because I know it doesn't really affect you in the legislature. But how do you feel about the city council's proposition to stop arresting low-level cannabis or enforcing low-level cannabis possession laws here in the city of Austin?
I think if there's a legal way for them to do that, I think I would support that. These are not criminal, these are not violent offenders. I don't know enough about the impact. I have talked to law enforcement before when this was a legislative topic, and law enforcement says, we don't want to deal with these cases either. So I think they're headed in the right direction.
We're going to do this for 5 more minutes, if we have that many questions.
I'll try to make it pretty quick. We've only been here for about a year, and one of the reasons we picked Austin was because of the possibility of working with refugees, because we were in the Peace Corps recently, and we're really good at Spanish now.
Cool.
So we feel like we want to be useful here in the U.S. We're doing it in other places, but now we want to see what we can do in the U.S. So one of my questions is, you have a lot of new people coming in. You mentioned that, but I'm pretty new here, so I don't know. Do you think that will help the people that are mostly coming in? Do you think those are people that will help shift the politics a little? We thought we'd be 2 blue dots here in Texas when we came.
No, I don't know. I know my district fairly well, and I know that I have a lot of people who came here as refugees and then became citizens. Africa, Nigeria, different parts of Africa come to mind. But I know that Texas, the growth that Texas has been experiencing is, there's implications for that growth. And I went block walking recently for a woman who's running in the Fort Bend area, and we knocked on the door, and there was Turkish Americans, Nigerian Americans, different faiths, Muslim Americans. So I don't know that we are all really connected and in touch with how much we're growing. I think they're awesome. They're very energized. They're very enthusiastic about being a part of this country. And it's just a sin that we haven't adjusted our bureaucracy and our laws to say, we want you here. And what do we need to do to make sure that you feel safe and you're comfortable here? So thank you for the work that you're doing. And I hope that it gets better for all of us.
And thank you, Celia.
All right, Steve.
You did a wonderful thing.
All right, we'll stick around if y'all have any questions.
Will you be available just to say hello?
sorry?
You'll be available to say hello in the lobby?
You bet. Me and Maria Elena are going to stick around.
So as long as I'm here, there'll always be chocolate chip cookies.
Yeah. And I'll also say my staff, my legislative director is here. Taryn is here, so she's here to kind of support me and answer any questions you guys have as well.
So please join us in the lobby for more talk and coffee and chocolate chip cookies. Thank you.